What keeps someone from walking away when every instinct tells them they do not belong? How does a college student, focused entirely on the craft of acting, suddenly adapt to the punishing, relentless rhythm of an idol training camp? When the physical exhaustion sets in and the gap between your skills and your peers feels impossible to cross, where do you find the strength to stay? For Kim Seokjin, the journey to becoming the bedrock of the world's biggest music group was not paved with early musical prodigy status. It was built on absolute, unwavering resilience. But where did that resilience originate? When the pressure of the training rooms became suffocating, what anchor kept him from giving up? The story of BTS is often told through the lens of their collective underdog triumph. Yet, zooming in on Jin's individual path reveals a distinct kind of struggle. He was not a rapper honed in the underground scene. He was not a street dancer with years of battle experience. He was a university student, plucked off the street for his striking appearance, thrown into a high-stakes environment where looks meant nothing without relentless, grueling hard work. The transition was brutal. The learning curve was vertical. Today, we recognize him as a vocal powerhouse and a charismatic stage presence. But to understand the artist he is today, we have to go back to the days when he was just Seokjin, a young man trying to survive a system designed to break the weak. And the secret to his survival was not just internal willpower. It was a foundation of support, a quiet but unbreakable tether to his family that kept him grounded. How exactly did his family's influence not only keep him in the agency, but also inadvertently nurture the rest of his future bandmates? That is a story that goes far beyond simple encouragement. To comprehend the magnitude of Jin's challenge, we must first look at the reality of his casting. He was a student at Konkuk University, one of South Korea's prestigious institutions, pursuing an acting degree. His daily life involved commuting, studying scripts, and attending classes. The idol industry was entirely foreign to him. When Big Hit Entertainment approached him after he simply stepped off a bus, they saw raw potential, but potential is just the starting line. Stepping into the training rooms at Big Hit meant entering an entirely new, demanding world. He was suddenly surrounded by teenagers and young men who lived and breathed hip-hop, dance, and music production. Imagine the sheer psychological weight of that environment. You're older than many of your peers, yet in this specific arena, you are at the absolute bottom of the hierarchy of skill. The hours were grueling. Dance practices stretched late into the night and early into the morning. For someone whose body was not conditioned for intense choreography, the physical toll was immense. Every muscle ached. Progress was agonizingly slow. It's one thing to work hard, it's another to work fiercely while constantly feeling like you're holding others back. That unique pressure has broken many trainees. Many walk away, choosing a safer, more predictable path. Jin could have easily returned to his university life. He had a backup plan. He had an out. But he stayed, and the reasons he stayed are deeply intertwined with the values instilled in him by his parents and his older brother. There's a specific quiet motivation that Jin has referenced regarding his mother. He once shared a deeply personal memory of his mother sitting with her friends. In South Korean society, as in many cultures, parents often share and celebrate the achievements of their children. Jin noticed while other mothers would boast about their sons' accomplishments, his mother would often remain silent, simply listening. He realized he wanted to change that. He wanted to give his mother a reason to speak up, a reason to be overwhelmingly proud. This was not about arrogance. It was about honoring the woman who raised him. That profound desire to validate his parents' love and sacrifice became a quiet, burning engine inside him. Every time he failed a dance move, every time his vocals cracked during early training, the image of his mother's quiet dignity pushed him to try one more time. But the family support extended far beyond silent motivation. It became a lifeline for the entire group. What happened next is the part most people don't fully grasp about those early days, and it forever altered the dynamic of BTS. To understand the reality of a K-pop trainee in the early 2000s and 10s, particularly at a small, financially strapped agency, you have to look past the glamour of the stage. You have to look at the living conditions. The dorm was notoriously cramped. It was a single room shared by a rotating cast of exhausted young men, filled with the inevitable friction of high stress and zero privacy. Food was a constant issue. Good, nutritious food was a luxury entirely out of reach for teenagers surviving on meager trainee allowances. The younger members of the group had traveled from places like Busan, Daegu, and Gwangju. They were hundreds of miles away from their own families, isolated in Seoul, wrestling daily with the terrifying possibility that they might never actually debut. This is exactly where Jin's family quietly altered the trajectory of the entire group. Jin's family lived in Gwacheon, a city close enough to Seoul for him to maintain a physical connection to his roots. But instead of using his family home merely as a personal escape from the grueling training life, he brought pieces of his home back to that cramped dorm. He literally carried pots, pans, and cooking utensils from his mother's kitchen into their shared space. He brought back fresh ingredients. Armed with the allowance provided by his parents, he did not buy himself better clothes or easier transportation to ease his own burden. He went to the supermarket, he bought groceries, he cooked for the team. He made sure the younger members, some of whom were still in middle school and high school, had hot, home-cooked meals. This was not just about calories, it was about psychological survival. His parents, by providing these resources and this allowance, were unwittingly feeding the future of the group. For Jin, assuming the role of the caretaker, the eldest brother who provided warmth and a sense of normalcy, became his absolute anchor. Think about the psychology of his situation. In the mirrored walls of the dance studios, he was constantly reminded of how far behind he was. The vocal coaches were demanding, the choreographers were relentless, and the gap between his abilities and the underground prodigies around him was a daily source of immense pressure. But in the dorm, he was indispensable. He was building the team's emotional foundation, one shared meal at a time. This gave him a profound, vital sense of purpose. He knew he belonged there, not just because he was trying to be an idol, but because he was keeping his team intact. His family's quiet support allowed him to become the reliable, steady older brother the others desperately needed. And let us not overlook the influence of his own older brother. In Korean culture, familial expectations can be incredibly heavy, but Jin's older brother offered a different, crucial kind of support. He acted as a sounding board, a voice of reason outside the manic echo chamber of the entertainment industry. When the pressure built to a breaking point, when the uncertainty of their debut felt suffocating, having an older brother who understood him simply as Seokjin and not as a struggling trainee provided a vital psychological escape hatch. It allowed him to maintain a tether to reality. It reminded him that his worth was not solely defined by his monthly evaluations. The meals, the quiet determination to make his mother proud, the steadying, grounded presence of his family, these were the invisible pillars holding him upright through the darkest days of training. He was slowly forging an ironclad resilience. But surviving the dorm was half the battle. The true test of his resolve would come when the debut lineup was finally locked in and the agonizing wait was over. Because what happened when the relative safety of the training room was stripped away and the harsh, unforgiving spotlight of the Korean music industry hit him directly? That is when the foundation his family built would face its ultimate trial. When June 2013 arrived, the group finally debuted. But anyone who understands the reality of the Korean music industry knows that a debut is never a finish line. It is barely a starting block. They stepped out of the cramped training rooms and onto a battlefield dominated by industry giants. For Jin, the pressure instantly multiplied. He was designated as the visual of the group, a title that carries its own specific heavy burden. In a landscape quick to judge, being labeled the visual often means the public expects you to look flawless while quietly assuming you lack actual musical depth. The group's early concepts were fiercely, aggressively hip-hop focused. The choreography was rebellious, rapid, and demanding. It was an image completely at odds with his natural demeanor and his university acting background. Critics were quick to dismiss them. The agency was small, the resources were razor-thin, and the odds of long-term survival were statistically near zero. This is the exact environment that breeds paralyzing self-doubt. It is the kind of immense public pressure that makes a young artist question every single life choice that led them to that stage. Yet, Jin did not break. He leaned entirely into the work ethic his family had modeled for him. When the cameras turned off and the crowds went home, he was relentlessly working to close the gap between his current skill level and the stratospheric standard required by their intricate performances. He did not complain about the intense difficulty of the concepts. He simply adapted. He used the emotional intelligence he had cultivated at home, the same intelligence that told him his younger members needed those home-cooked meals in the dorm, to understand exactly what the group needed from him on stage. He became their steadfast, unshakable anchor. But the internal struggle was undeniably real. He watched his members, natural prodigies in rap and dance, effortlessly command the spotlight. He saw the way the industry praised their raw, innate talent. How do you maintain your own confidence when you are constantly comparing your agonizing behind-the-scenes struggle to someone else's natural highlight reel? You look back at your foundation. You remember the quiet dignity of a mother who never boasted but always believed. You remember the older brother who treated you not as a commodity fighting for screen time, but as a human being. That unshakable family bond acted as an invisible shield against the industry's harshest realities. It allowed him to accept his own pace of growth without ever succumbing to bitterness or jealousy. He began to slowly, carefully translate that profound, quiet resilience into his vocal performances. It was not an overnight transformation. It was a deliberate, hard-fought evolution. He was no longer just the caretaker in the dorm. He was forging himself into the emotional core of their music. And this evolution began to fully crystallize during a pivotal moment in their career. The creation of his first solo track is a story that perfectly encapsulates the immense burden he had been carrying since his trainee days. But it is only the beginning of his true artistic breakthrough. When the Wings album was in production, every member was tasked with presenting a solo track that reflected their personal journey. For Jin, this was a moment of profound vulnerability. He did not just walk into the studio to record a pre-written pop song. He actively participated in the composition, determined to tell his own story rather than sing someone else's idea of who he was. The resulting track was Awake. Listen closely to the raw narrative of that song. It is not a declaration of arrogant triumph. It is a startlingly honest, painful confession. He wrote about the paralyzing fear that he might never fly as high as his fellow members. He confronted the terrifying thought that he might not possess the same innate, natural wings as the prodigies standing next to him. Yet the absolute emotional core of the song is the fierce, unyielding declaration that despite that fear, he will keep struggling. He will keep reaching out his hand. He will push himself to run, even if it is just a little bit further. Consider the immense psychological security it takes to stand before a global audience and admit your deepest, darkest insecurities. Where does a person find the courage to be that painfully exposed? You do not find that courage in an industry that demands absolute perfection. You find it in the unconditional foundation built by a family. His parents taught him that honest, agonizing effort is infinitely more valuable than effortless perfection. He could sing Awake without fear of judgment because his family had already provided a safe harbor. They taught him that his worth was not dependent on being the absolute best in the room. It was dependent on giving his absolute best. This vulnerability changed everything. Fans did not just hear a polished pop star hitting the right notes, they heard a human being fighting for his rightful place. His voice, which he had to painstakingly train from scratch during those brutal early days, suddenly became the vehicle for some of the group's most emotionally devastating moments. He was not just surviving the complex choreographies anymore, he was dominating the vocal arrangements. He began to handle the stratospheric high notes, the soaring ad-libs, and the emotionally heavy bridges in their discography. The university acting student who once felt entirely out of place in a hip-hop cipher was now undeniably anchoring the vocal line of massive stadium anthems. This evolution from quiet survival to undeniable artistic mastery paved the way for an even bigger, more culturally significant revelation. If Awake was his confession of struggle, his next major milestone was his definitive declaration of self-worth. When the group launched their Love Yourself era, it was Jin who was chosen to deliver the crucial introductory manifesto. Epiphany became a global anthem. Standing alone on stage, commanding arenas of tens of thousands of people night after night, he sang about the profound realization that he is the one he should love in this world. Loving the imperfect, struggling, deeply human version of yourself is a revolutionary message. But look closely at where that message truly originates. It perfectly echoes the exact kind of quiet, steady, unwavering acceptance his family provided when the brutal trainee system offered none. His family loved the imperfect, struggling Seokjin, which laid the groundwork that allowed him to eventually love himself. He had finally transformed the agonizing pressure of his past into an unbreakable armor of self-acceptance. He had proven to himself, to his family, and to the world that he belonged exactly where he was. But the reality of BTS's trajectory is that the ceiling is always moving. The weight of global superstardom was accelerating at a terrifying, unprecedented pace. What happens when the pressure is no longer just about surviving a cramped dorm or proving your worth to your peers, but about carrying the shifting expectations of the entire world? The ultimate test of his resilience and the family bond that forged it was approaching fast.